All right, so in this video, I want to take some time looking at how we can organize our nervous system. And just like everything in anatomy and physiology, we can classify and organize by anatomy or by the physiology. So let's start first on the anatomical designations, and then we can get into the functional. So looking at anatomical separations, so if we're classifying by the anatomy, we'll have our CNS and we'll have our PNS. CNS means central nervous system. Central nervous system is going to be composed of our brain and our spinal cord. With this is where you're going to do things like processing. This is where you have memory. This is where you initiate commands. So this is the area that we tend to think of when we're thinking about our nervous system. As you're looking at some other things with this, I also like to mention the support staff. So yes, you have neurons in here. Actually, if you want to get into it, the neurons that are completely housed within here, those are going to be our inner neurons. So these are the cells doing all this stuff that I just listed up here. But you also have support cells, and these would be things like an astrocyte, an oligodendrocyte, a microglia, and an ependymal cell. I have a whole video that talks a little bit more about these, but these are basically the ones that help regulate the environment, insulate the cell, clean up things, and make sure that there's a way to transport stuff along the brain. So that's kind of your setup on the inside. With the PNS, what we're going to have is ganglia and nerves. Now, to make sense of that, I want to spend some time looking at the players. When we talk about brain, spinal cord, nerves, what we're using is neurons to make up these structures. These are the ones that send the signals. And so with your basic neurons, you'll have the soma, you'll have dendrites that branch off, that receive information, and then we'll have the axons that send in the information. We have our soma as our cell body and the axon. When you're looking at a nerve is just a collection of axons. So if you put a bunch of cells together, this gets wrapped up, that's a nerve in the PNS. So in the PNS, if we have a collection of axons, we call it a nerve. So let's do that real quick. So collection of, and so if we have a collection of axons in the PNS, we call it a nerve. Same structure in the CNS, we call it tract. So grouping of axons, the difference here is just you're letting you know that you're inside of the brain or the spinal cord. So you're grouping with tracts, moving stuff up and down the spinal cord, or you're using tracts to move things from one side of the brain to the other. When you group up your axons, what also happens a lot of times is that your somas end up clustered together. So if you have the somas clustered together, which is a cell body, if you're in the PNS, we would call that a ganglia. Same structure, but inside of the brain or spinal cord, we call it a nucleus. So that's what I mean when I say ganglia and nerves. We're talking this stuff right here. We're talking about how we're grouping the different parts of the neurons, compacting the stuff together, because it's going to work like a little wire going to a target, and there's other organ systems and other things you have to work your way around. Okay, so now that we kind of gotten a better understanding about what these words mean, let's talk about the support staff here and some of the basic functions. So the basic function of the PNS is just relay. Your job is to take sensory information to the CNS and then take motor information from the CNS. That's your job. You're a little wire. We do also have some support staff, but not as much. So we have the satellite cell to regulate the environment and the Schwann cell, which is also called a neurolemmacyte, which will do insulation. So those are more kind of separating things out by their anatomy. Let's talk about what if you're separating things out by their function. So functional classifications are dealing more with what kind of information are you handling. So functional divisions would be dealing with sensory information. So if you think about it as input, so if you're going in, sensory, versus if you're going out, that's motor. Sometimes the sensory information that's going in, you're aware of it. And in that case, we call that somatic. So aware or conscious would be somatic. So somatic sensory, the stuff that you can name, like, oh, I feel that, or I taste this, or I hear that. With somatic, we can actually separate them out into general senses. And these are the ones that are widespread across your skin. So touch, temperature, pain, pressure, vibration. Versus special senses have a specialized organ for them, specifically in the head. So this would be things like sight, hearing, balance, smell, taste. So Sight, the organ from eye. Hearing, from the ear. Balance, also ear. Smell, from the nose. Taste, from the tongue. So they all have specialized organs, versus general is stuff from skin. And I'm also going to add skin and joints. So not only is it stuff like touch, pressure, temperature, pain, vibration that we can feel from our skin, it's also our position in the world. That's what we call proprioception. So when we're looking at this one, it's stuff that has receptors all over our body, and it's dealing with what is happening in our environment and our position within the environment. So those are your senses and how you can separate those out. But sometimes there's stuff that you're not aware of, and we're dealing with organs here. So the word is actually going to mean organs. So it's going to be our visceral senses. So visceral sensory is dealing with things like, what is the concentration of hydrogen ions in your body? Where do we have all of our fluids? What is our what is our blood pressure, for example? Those are all things that are being monitored right now. Somewhere in your brain, you know this information, but you can't consciously state any of it. Under motor, you still also have somatic, which means the same thing. You're aware of it. It's conscious. And so in that case, the thing that you're going to go talk to is skeletal muscle. But the other stuff that automatically happens, that's our autonomic nervous system. So motor is all output. So our somatic is output to skeletal muscle. Our autonomic is going to be output, but specifically to things like glands, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. It has two settings. So the two settings that you have are your fight or flight, which is sympathetic, and your rest and digest, which we call parasympathetic. Sympathetic, the trick for that is if somebody's in a fight or flight, you feel sympathetic for them. You're like, oh, the bear's going to eat them. Versus parasympathetic is what we call our rest and digest. So you're just kind of doing the things like maintaining your homeostasis and worrying about regulating your well, that's the same thing. You're worried about regulating your internal environment. So those are your basic layouts of your nervous system, either by anatomy or by what you're doing. Thanks for watching.